Hello, thank you for joining me for this discussion on risk-based thinking to improve quality management system performance. I'm your presenter, Buddy Cressionnie. A little bit about me is I've been participating the last several years with ISO TC 176 at the international level, having participated in the writing of ISO 9001 and 9004, also working the interpretations for ISO 9001 and future concepts. I've been involved with the US tag to TC 176 for about really since 1980. Been a certified lead auditor through Exemplar Global, of course, the sponsor of this activity since 96, and I've been working with regards to certification bodies since 97. My area of specialization is aviation, space, and defense. You can see some of the responsibilities that I have, including being the chair of the AAQSC. In Americas, we know it as AS 9100 team lead, as well as having my credentials as an auditor to AS 9100, 9110, 9120. But let's talk about this presentation. The description that I submitted for the presentation is that we're going to focus on different approaches to address risk management and to ensure organization future success. That's what we all should be looking for, is sustainable development activities, future success for the organization. This presentation will expand your perspective on risk and opportunities within an organization. The topics will include a combination of QMS as well as operational risk and opportunity discussion. So we're going to cover basically the outline, risk-based thinking. First, we're going to define it. Then we're going to discuss the requirements, then application, implementation of risk-based thinking, how to audit risk-based thinking, and then some of the benefits. Even though my background is focused towards aviation, space, and defense, I really developed this presentation to focus on ISO 9001 2015 risk applications. So I feel that that's for a broader audience, and hopefully you'll find the content useful. So let's first define risk-based thinking. ISO 9000 2015 defines risk as the effect of uncertainty. Of course, it has some notes as well. Talks about it being referenced to potential events and consequences, or a combination of those. And also, typically risk is looked at as a combination of consequences of an event and the associated likelihood of occurrence. And a lot of times we'll see that on our risk board or risk template to be able to go characterize high, medium versus low risk. In the standard, it talks to us about the fact that risk-based thinking has always been implicit in ISO 9001. And that's true. If you look at it through the planning activities, the review activities, the improvement activities, you can see that very much of the standard was kind of focused towards proactive thinking, this risk-based thinking that has now been introduced in the year 2015. Let's, for example, consider things like design and development, all right? It just doesn't say just go do design and development, right? It starts off with overall planning, considering my inputs, my controls, my design reviews, my verification, validation. I'm not just going to throw it over the fence. I'm going to look for various stages of maturity. And so this has been the standard for a long while. And we didn't really think about it, but that's all activities to minimize risk. Well, the ISO 9001 2015 makes risk-based thinking explicit. It requires it. And we're going to talk about it from a standpoint of looking at it from a management system perspective, as well as a product lifecycle perspective. So in the standard, it also talks about risk-based thinking being throughout the whole life cycle, from strategic and operational planning through the entire life cycle. This, of course, replaces what we used to have in the standard called preventive action. It was interesting when that clause was removed. there was a lot of people who got pretty upset and said, hey, that's pretty fundamental. And so where do we have preventive action? It was at the very end of the standard, 853 and prior revisions of the standard. And then we required organizations to do these steps, which really weren't the way you did preventive action. Now what we have is we have this risk-based thinking, and we'll talk about it in this session, which kind of permeates the whole standard. Much better solution. But also we can't forget about opportunities, because it's risk and opportunities. Opportunities, the results of a situation favorable to achieving an intended results. Some examples could include, like, as I'm looking at my interested parties, do I have an opportunity to go attract new customers, develop maybe new products and services that they might be interested in? Maybe it's about being more efficient to reduce waste, improve productivity. Opportunities could be positive outcomes that may arise from the uncertainty or the opportunity based upon evaluating the business. And let's focus on the fact that we have a principle, an overall quality management principle that talks about improvement. All right, the expectation of a system and the whole IAF guidance is that your system's going to continue to improve, and opportunities help us do that. The last statement I'd like to make is, of course, with Annex SL and the Common Management System structure, we have certain text and certain requirements that now are permeated through all ISO management system standards. And this risk-based thinking is included in all those different standards. So we're going to see this proactive type thinking, not only in quality management system, but other management systems as well. Now looking exactly where the requirements are, well, if you look at the main clause that's covered, it'd be 6.1. The first part of it, talking about planning, should consider the issues. 4.1, talking about the context of the organizations and those issues, those internal and external issues, and the requirements. 4.2, those requirements coming from interested parties to determine risk and opportunities to achieve its intended results, right? That's what we want. We want to try to determine what do we need to go do to ensure that the result is favorable, enhancing desirable effects, preventing, reducing undesirable effects, and mitigating those to achieve improvement. Organizations shall plan, implement, evaluate the effectiveness of those actions to address risk and opportunities. So I hear from several people that, well, how are you going to go audit thinking? Well, it does talk in the standard about, and it's in 6.1.2, about the fact that you do have to plan, implement, and evaluate the effectiveness of actions. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the auditing session. One of the things I love in the standard, and we do it as well for corrective action, is the fact that risk and opportunities actions proportionate to the potential impacts on product or service conformity. Starting off my career doing cost-benefit analysis, this is significant. You know, what it basically says is I'm not going to spend dollars chasing dimes. All right. But also, I've come across companies who have said, well, we have risk criteria, and guess what? It never trips the risk threshold. Well, you know what? And we'll talk some about risk as far as a closed loop in clause 10. But you know what? I've never come across a perfect company that is purely risk-free. All right. So I don't really accept the fact that I can have risk criteria and never generate risk. Likewise, I've done training at some organizations and they're real proud of themselves. Hey, buddy, guess what? We've identified 130 risks. Wow, that's impressive. How many were high? How many were medium? How many were low? How'd you categorize these? How are you working those? And I get a blank stare. Remember, identification is only the first step. What are you doing about those risks to improve your system? The risk-based thinking is integrated within the entire standard. Matter of fact, even before we talk about requirements in ISO 9001:2015, in the introduction, we start talking about the concept of risk-based thinking. We also point to the annex in the back of the standard with regards to risk-based thinking. Clause 4, I already mentioned the fact that when you're looking at the external and internal issues with regards to the context of the organization, that is a prime opportunity to look at what are the risks associated with these decisions. Clause 5, it specifically says that top management promotes awareness of risk-based thinking. So when you're having your discussion with the top management of the organization, this is a good thing to bring up, to have some discussion on how do you categorize risk. And I'm not talking about operational type risk. I'm talking about risk to the business, risk to the quality management system, risk to the overall processes. Determine and address the risk and opportunities that can affect product service conformity. What do you see there, leader, with regards to where the risk you have that impact your ability to provide goods and products and services to your customer on time and of excellent quality? What's your customer satisfaction scores or data telling you about that? Clause 6. Obviously, this is the clause where risk is included. To identify risk and opportunities related to performance, take actions to address them. Clause 7, the whole resources. Let's think about this, okay? Clause 7 kind of starts off with human resources, personnel, staffing. How do we determine what's happening in the marketplace? Can we get adequate staffing to support our needs? Is there an aging workforce demographic going on? Competence. Where are we at with regards to competence in the industry? Are we recognized as one of the experts in the industry? Equipment. Do we have enough equipment to satisfy the needs to meet the schedule and quality needs of our customer? Document information. All right, also talking clause 7. How much document information is enough document information? So all those things should be thought about with regards to risk-based thinking as we're looking at resources. Clause 8, we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about operational processes and some things to consider walking through that. But whenever you're looking at a process, it's always a good idea to also be auditing risk, and we'll talk some more about that. Clause 9. All right, what is clause 9? We're talking about analysis of data. Obviously, you want to analyze the data that is most meaningful to your quality management system, that has the greatest risk, that's going to provide you the greatest bang for your buck. Internal audits. Yes, obviously you spend more time, more effort in looking at higher risk area of your quality management system. Management review. Why would you spend time with your executive leadership team on areas of low risk? It should be focused on higher risk type areas. Clause 10, with regards to improvement and corrective actions. Here's where we have that closed loop saying to update the risk and opportunities associated with when I take corrective actions. So think about that. What's that talking about? That's saying, hey, you had an escape within your quality management system because you had an action that required corrective action and you missed it up front in your risk analysis, go back and look to see, did you miss anything else? Why was that missed? Now that you understand this weakness, maybe there's some items you need to add to your risk register. So let's look a little bit at application implementation. I kind of have this divided up into business processes as well as operational processes. The business processes, the first one we've talked about a little bit already with regards to organizational context, where we're looking at the different factors. Can include business factors, social factors, political stability, technology, competitors, statutory, regulatory. Is there a risk with regards to new requirements coming that I need to go take some particular action on? You know, it's kind of funny because I know that we have a requirement, obviously, in management review to be reviewing the new issues that come up. But hopefully organizations are not waiting to management review to have those discussions. These are things that people should be addressing real time within their system, not just doing an annual SWOT or PESTEL analysis. All right? No, you need to take action to address these issues in a timely manner. Also, other things could include the work environment. How's my performance? How is my performance acceptable to my customers? The human aspects, operational factors, and the organizational governance overall. Interested parties. One of the requirements of the standard is that we monitor the inputs and the feedback from interested parties. So how are we doing? What adjustments do we need to make? What risks are there out there with regards to our interested parties that we've identified? Our processes. What's the strengths of our processes? Where do we have some weaknesses with regards to actions that we need to take? What's the monitoring we're going to do of our processes and the measures to ensure that we're executing our processes as appropriate? Financial controls. A lot of times auditors don't tend to think that broadly in QMS dialogue, but I just wanted to show that this has a business aspect too. That, you know, obviously organizations need to be sustainable. Before you go out and as part of your supplier selection process, you probably look at the financial viability of your suppliers. Right? Your customers want you to be financially viable as well. How do you manage the risk associated with that so you continue to serve that customer well into the future? How do you consider things like the impact of market conditions, competition, changing needs, new technologies, world events, etc.? Now let's talk a little bit about operational or life cycle processes, where we go from the beginning of a process, where we have the beginning of an order we get from a customer through delivery. All right. First, we contract the process. Obviously, there needs to be an understanding of the risk prior to acceptance of that tender. Before you accept, let's make sure that we're capable with regards to being able to meet the requirements. We have the capacity. We can meet the delivery schedule, the concerns. If we've had process complexity issues, maybe we've had problems with these particular parts in the past performance issues, where we're trying to do something where we've not been successful in the past. That should be part of our risk process. How are we going to mitigate those so we don't have problems again? It could be a maturity issue. Maybe my customer is asking me to hold some kind of tolerances or do something that's really at the state of the art with regards to the maturity of the industry. Those things would need to be understood so we could contract upfront appropriately, providing additional lag time or additional expenses for risk mitigation activities, maybe try to go get some external resources to help us out with that. All right, but what's going to be how are we going to mitigate before we agree to go do this business? Business planning, okay? We want to make sure that our business plan is sound. We want to get all the stakeholders engaged. We want to make sure it's performed in a structured, controlled manner within the resources that we have and the schedule constraints that we have as a business. What are the risks associated with that? What do we need to be concerned with to make sure that we can deliver as promised? Engineering. What's interesting is the word risk does not show up in 8.3, all right? They have some words that sound a whole lot like risk, but obviously we have technical risk in meeting customer, contractual, regulatory type requirements. Sometimes we use some engineering controls. Maybe we'll have some tighter tolerances for certain areas, or we use different materials that might be appropriate, or processes to make sure that we are mitigating the product risk aspects throughout our production to service provision. Of course, that can also include product and service safety risk as well. If there's any risk with regards to the safe operation of the product, those need to be considered within the engineering process. Purchasing. You can tell purchasing is all in one chart. Obviously, you can tell where my passion is. What's interesting is more and more activity is being outsourced to external providers. So we need to make sure as an organization we're doing a thorough job in assessing supplier risk, especially early on when we do our qualification and selecting of suppliers. Many organizations send out questionnaires, surveys, kind of a get to know you type of things. Is that survey getting the information that you need to go make an informed decision? Is that questionnaire giving you insight to the performance of that particular supplier? Do you automatically approve that supplier, or do you wait, conditionally approve them until you get products that are meeting requirements? The supplier selection process should be robust and understand the risk so you can make sure you develop any mitigation plans. Sometimes this can include going out for a supplier site survey. Nothing can provide the insight to actually go and understand, here's the strengths of my suppliers and some of the weaknesses of my suppliers. By making that supplier better to address those weaks is only going to help you as a customer of that supplier. Sometimes the suppliers are building things that have high risk. In the aviation, space, and defense industry, we have several of those where if the material fails, all right, we could have loss of life. So therefore, we want to make sure that the suppliers are verifying that those materials are meeting the test requirements, that they are the materials they're supposed to be. So one of the things you can do is if you have any items that are high risk, all right, to high risk type products, make sure they're of quality. And I'm saying that from aviation, space, and defense. I'll give you another example. If I was a restaurant and there was a certain ingredient that could either make or break the dish, all right, I would make sure that particular ingredient that I went to the farmer's market and only got the best quality item for that particular dish, okay? So it can be thought of more broadly. Supplier flow down requirements. Here's an understanding of here's what we expect from our supplier to ensure that there's no risk of miscommunication. Based upon how the supplier is performing or the criticality of what they're providing, the amount and type of verification can be changed depending upon the risk. Maybe it's even including some kind of periodic testing to make sure that they're using the right materials. Counterfeit parts are a big risk to the industry with regards to understanding and making sure that test reports are actual, electronic components are from original component manufacturers, making sure that the material is authentic. Finally, looking at the type and extent of controls appropriate to the suppliers, to their processes, products, and services. I'm going to be reviewing performance. When do I need to get excited? When do I need to go provide some help? When do I issue a SCAR or a CAR? All right, when do I start looking for another source? Those are all types of things you need to look at from a risk perspective because it affects your overall system. Production activities. Obviously, in the production realm, you have several issues with regards to risk. First of all, before we even get started, what's my production readiness? I'm not just going to go out and start cutting metal, right? I'm going to go first, make sure that I have all the documentation, the tooling if necessary, the equipment, the calibrated tools to go verify, the materials, and make sure all that's in place to make sure that I can go provide conforming products and services. Also, I'm going to look to make sure that my capacity, my capability, and the controls are adequate for the work to be performed with regard to the production activities. In aviation, space, and defense, we still talk about special processes. I know that clause has kind of been now just a one line item in ISO, but it's when materials cannot be verified at a later date, right? Where you put more emphasis into the process than you do to the verification activities because it's ingrained in the product, okay? Those are, by their very nature, high-risk type products. Finally, the product and service goes to the customer, and we have post-delivery. Is the customer satisfied? The end user? How are they using the product to make sure that it stays serviceable? To understand so we can have stock of spare parts so we can be responsive to our customer needs by understanding the risk and how the product is used. So hopefully you kind of got a feel that from an operational standpoint, all right, it kind of follows all the Section 8 processes across the board. So as you're doing your auditing activity, that's what would be expected. Many times you'll see a Swiss cheese model like this, where we have all these different layers of Swiss cheese, so to speak, and the holes are where we have risks with regards to each one of the processes. And where we have an escape is when a particular hole kind of lines up so it's not caught from the contract through to the delivery of the product and service to the customer. That would indicate an escape, okay? So don't look at risk as it's just a 611 thing. No, it's much broader. So let's talk a little bit about auditing risk-based thinking. There you see the first line. Auditing of risk cannot be a standalone activity. So this is not one to go send one of your auditors, oh yeah, go audit risk. Everybody should be auditing risk as part of the audit team. right? We talked about the context, interested parties, QMS processes. We talked about the fact of bringing it up in top management interviews, as well as considering it through all the different phases of operational processes. It's kind of interesting because many times from an operational process standpoint, we'll see each of those owners of those processes. So for example, my contracts manager will manage the contracts risk, engineering, the technical risk, purchasing, all right, the external provider risk, and so forth. Then what they'll do is for large organizations, as those things start having a program impact, they'll be elevated to some kind of a program risk. Then you also can have even another level of elevation being organizational risk. So the standard, as far as ISO 9001, does not have a requirement for formal methods or tools for risk management, or even require a documented risk management process. Now, what it would expect is that you could talk to the organization about what are you doing with regards to risk, and they would be able to give you some examples and be able to show you, here's what we're doing with regards to risk. Also, to evaluate the extent to the document information needed to provide objective evidence with regards to here's how we're managing risk. As I mentioned before, remember that the standard does require you to plan risk activities. How do you plan these activities? How do you implement them? How do you determine whether if those actions were effective, are we mitigating the risk? Obviously, you want to make sure that you are addressing both risk and opportunities, and I know I've spent most of my time talking about risk, but also the opportunities for the improvement to increase the effectiveness of your overall quality management system, to achieve improved results and prevent negative effects. The benefits of risk-based thinking: obviously, increased effectiveness of the quality management system, of how the organization operates, to give assurance that the quality management system can achieve its intended results, enhance desirable effects, prevent or reduce undesirable effects, and improve results overall. Well, I hope that this has been helpful to you. I thank you very much for your participation, and I wish you continued success. Thank you.